Hey everyone, welcome to the Sustain the Range podcast. I'm Lauren, your host, and this podcast is a personal exploration of my experiences in everything ranching. From beef operations to training horses to sustainable farming and regenerative practices, we'll cover it all. Each episode features enlightening conversations with guests who bring their unique perspectives and expertise. Whether they're seasoned ranchers or first-generation farmers, we all share a common bond and deep appreciation for the land and the livestock we raise. Tune in each week for engaging discussions, inspiring stories, and practical insights from the ranching community, and let's embark on this incredible journey together. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sustain the Range. I hope you all are having a wonderful week so far, and this week I'm absolutely thrilled to chat with the amazing Keely Covello. First off, I have a complete fangirl crush on Keely. I've been following her work for a little over a year, and I just love her even more after our conversation. Keely is a powerful voice for ag, sharing all the news and stories that you might not always see in the mainstream through her incredible work and through her brand, Unwon, which we'll talk about in the episode. She's eloquent, passionate, and a true advocate for American agriculture. In this episode, you'll hear Keely's inspiring story, our discussion on the challenges in ag, her upcoming documentary set to release this fall, story she's covering about a ranch murder in California, while also touching a little bit about what's happening in agriculture there as well. Since we recorded this episode, Keely and her father have launched their new ranch management software, Ranch Vision, which is already getting some amazing results from ranchers. Keely will share more about this software in our conversation, as we just talk about so much more related to ag in the Western industry that I think you'll really enjoy as well. So, without further ado, here's the episode. Thank you so much, Keely, for joining me on the podcast today. I'm super excited to talk to you. I know we've been trying to get this on the books, and I'm so glad that we finally got a chance to connect, and I really appreciate being here. So welcome to Sustain the Range.
Thanks so much, Lauren. I'm glad to be here. Love what you're doing. So it's an honor is mine.
Yeah, thank you. So I've been following you on Instagram for, I want to say a year or two at least a year. And I really love your page, America Unwon, and we can definitely talk about that a little bit too. But I love everything that you share and all of the awareness that you bring to just different challenges and, just current events that are going on in agriculture. But I just want to give you a chance to kind of introduce yourself. So if you just want to tell us, who you are, where you're from, if you grew up in agriculture, your involvement in ag now, and anything else you'd like to share.
Totally. Well, thank you so much for the kind words. I really appreciate that. I guess I would say, my background is growing up in Northern California, a really remote part of California most people aren't very familiar with. My parents are both veterinarians, so my dad is a large animal ranch vet, and just growing up with him in his truck, helping out on all of these ranches, is just a great way to grow up. I feel so blessed to have that experience. And that really shaped my life and my career. I always wanted to be a writer since I was a little kid. But I figured, I need a job, I need a trade around that. So I went to school for journalism. And I just love the idea of, finding the real story. You get paid to ask people questions. Basically, I'm very nosy, so that worked out great for me. I love getting in people's business and hear their life story and kind of amplify the stories that I thought were special and worth sharing. I wanted to be a political journalist. So in I believe my senior year of college, I went to Washington, D.C. I got an internship at the Washington Times and reported during the 2012 election. And that was a great experience. It was really cool to get to do that and cover Senate hearings and SCOTUS and kind of dive into the political reporting I'd always wanted to do. But I realized when I was there that I was very homesick. I missed my small town, and I missed the kind of stories and the kind of reporting I got to do as a small town journalist back home in Mendocino County. And so our professor at this journalism school, one of the assignments we had during this semester was he asked us to start a blog on any topic. And this was kind of when BuzzFeed was really hot and Drudge was a big deal. So our professors were tuned into the fact that the internet was going to change journalism significantly, and they wanted us to have some experience. So they had us pick a topic and report on it for the whole semester. And I, being very homesick, picked ranching. And my professor was like, pretty blatantly told me, this is not going to work. There's not enough material in this topic for you to cover. And that made me kind of mad. And I told him, I'm going to prove you wrong. So by the end of the semester, he called me in his office and he said, I had no idea how much news there is in this industry. I had no idea how much is going on in the West. You proved me wrong. This was the most successful, journalism blog we've had in the program. And he said, you got to keep doing this. And I was at that time just very disillusioned with reporting in DC, as exciting as it was. I felt like the people I was talking to and the type of coverage I was doing it just wasn't inspiring in the way I thought it would be as a kid. I thought that this is where the movers and shakers are. This is where the real Americans are. This is where people who care about our country and care about real issues work. And that's just not the case. That was a very naive way for me to see DC. And I'm sure there are lots of people who do care about our country there. But I was really homesick for the folks that I had been covering back home, the issues I'd been covering back home related to land rights or eminent domain or overregulation affecting agriculture. And I felt like those people that I grew up with, those older men and women in agriculture, were really the heroes that I had always been looking for and always been seeking to amplify through my work. So I decided that I didn't want to pursue a political journalism career, and I wanted to keep doing my ranch blog. And so I ended up getting a job in marketing. I'll sum this up quickly, but I got a job in marketing just to pay my student loans. And that ended up being great for me because I learned a lot about how the internet works and search engine optimization, and kind of was able to bring some of those marketing skills to clients in the Western industry, which is what my sister and I have been doing for a while. My sister's my business partner. Her name is Michaela. So she was a CPA and worked at Deloitte in San Francisco before we both just got sick of corporate life and started our own business. And through that, we had the opportunity to really use the marketing skills that we learned and the journalism background that I had to start amplifying stories that were important to us. So we worked with a lot of folks in the Western industry, and we started working in film really by accident. I never grew up thinking I would be able to work in film. That seemed very out of reach for me as a small town kid. But we worked with some amazing mentors and started producing films that were related to ranching. We worked with several nonprofits in the state to create authentic films about ranchers and what they're doing and how their work is beneficial for the environment against sort of the mainstream thought that they're damaging to the environment. We wanted to show people, what does this operation really look like? And we've just had a lot of fun with that. So we've kind of pivoted our business. We still do some marketing, but we focus largely on film now and producing documentaries. And my side blog is still going. It's called America Unwon now. And I just try to cover stories in the Western and agricultural industries, stories affecting working Americans across industries, people that don't always see their stories front and center. I try to aggregate those and produce additional coverage on them through my blog and all of my spare time. So that's just kind of a passion project that I have been maintaining.
Thank you so much for sharing all that.
There you go.
No. Thank you. I appreciate it. I have a ton of questions for you. But you brought up, and you just went to DC to do another documentary too. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I don't necessarily want to be a political documentarian, but the types of stories that we cover just don't have a lot of interest in mainstream Hollywood. And so there was a group that is loosely political. They're kind of a centrist to right of center documentary incubator that kicked off in DC called Palladium Pictures. The founder is Michael Pack, who was a former Trump appointee. He was the head of Voice of America. And he's been working with PBS and Endowment for the Humanities for a long time. He's made a lot of documentaries for PBS over the years. He made a documentary about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, I believe in 2020. So he's just a very experienced documentarian, and he wanted to share his knowledge with the younger generation of filmmakers telling stories that are not necessarily covered in the mainstream. So I heard about that, applied for it, and we were accepted. We're one of the 4 inaugural members of the documentary incubator, which is just such an honor. We're the only folks telling kind of these agricultural stories. So it's a really special opportunity, and I think we need a lot more of it. So I am heading up next week to Northern California to film another documentary. This is a short piece back in my hometown investigating a murder. So it's true crime, but it's also related to agriculture because this gentleman was a rancher who was killed near his ranch, and we'll be looking into what happened. There's a lot, not to get into the weeds, but up in Northern California, and I believe there's some similar issues in Montana and Colorado right now. There's a lot of cartel presence in the national forests, and I think that's an issue that people don't talk about enough. So that's the main suspect right now, is that there was an organized crime element in the murder. So we'll be investigating that and hopefully shedding light on this issue that ranchers are facing, but really hasn't been covered in the media. And just the kind of threat that they're facing because of our lax policies and how much we're allowing to happen on our public land.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. That's, I'm sure, just like almost, if as you're talking about it, like a once in a lifetime type of deal where you get to kind of go and cover these stories. And I've talked about this a lot, even just with friends and a little bit on the podcast too, but just about, the mainstream media and agriculture as a whole, getting even, such a bad rap. And I released an episode the other day, I believe. And, I kind of made a little bit of a knock at people who are, saying that, oh, cows are killing the planet and climate change and all this. And, my main point was just that there's so much misinformation out there. And I just think what you're doing and the things that you've shared on your Instagram is so amazing because, like you said, that so much of this information is not even coming from the ranchers or the producers or the people who are actually working the land. It's people living in the cities or, a part of these organizations that are, in the mainstream media and that are kind of promoting this. And we're not asking the actual people that are doing the work. And so we absolutely need people like you. And what do you think is, the biggest challenge in terms of that, trying to get this information out into the mainstream media? Have you found that it's really difficult? Like, obviously, social media has changed things completely, right? Compared to when there wasn't Facebook and Instagram. I mean, a lot of this information wasn't able to get out, right? Because mainstream media kind of controlled everything, but social media now, there's a little bit more access to information, obviously. So, what are kind of some of the challenges that you've seen or things that you've maybe directly experienced firsthand that, proved challenging for you to get this information out there?
That's a really good question. Thank you for the kind words. I feel like it's such a privilege and it's really fun. I love these kind of stories. I feel like my job is not so much to speak, but to amplify people who should be speaking. You brought up social media. We're basically just victims of the algorithm at this point. Whatever is on our feed is what we're going to be paying attention to. And what I've discovered is most ranchers, and this is probably an indirect answer to your question, but most ranchers aren't interested in going out and speaking. They're busy, they're working. They don't necessarily want to spend all of their time explaining why they should exist. They're already feeding us. So I think it's a big ask for them to now have to defend their livelihood, but that's where we're at. And I think if I can do my part in using what I've learned about journalism and marketing to help amplify those voices that aren't on the algorithm, that aren't seeking attention, that aren't seeking the limelight and the focus, if I can help amplify their voices, that's I would be honored to do that. I think that's something very worthwhile. I think we need to hear more from them. So I think that's a challenge facing ag, is that these are busy people and it's not always a lucrative industry. It's something that people time and time again, ranchers and farmers tell me that they do this because this is their family legacy. This is their livelihood. This is their lifestyle. This is what they love, not because they're in it for the money, because it isn't a lucrative career for most. It's very challenging. So you kind of have to love it. You kind of have to be passionate about it to continue doing it. So that doesn't leave a lot of time or a lot of room for going out and explaining why you should continue to do what you've been doing. And I just think that there's just so much misinformation around what, if we're talking specifically about ranching, I know that's sort of the focus of your podcast is rangeland and sustaining the range. There's just so much basic misinformation about what ranching is and what it means to graze cattle, graze sheep, graze goats on the rangeland. Like, why is that a problem when we've had ungulates grazing in these wide open spaces in the American West for as long as humankind has been coexisting? So I think there's just a fundamental misunderstanding about what the meat industry looks like, how you get beef on the dinner plate. And I think people throw around terms like factory farming or, big ag. They don't understand that I think it's about 97% of ranching is operated by families in the US. It's family owned and operated. These are small operations. I think the average herd size is 50 head. And most cattle in the US spends most of its life on grassland. So it's not these tight, cramped quarters that people imagine when they watch documentaries on Netflix. That's just a very inaccurate picture of what's going on. So I think the vested interests that are out there, not to get too conspiratorial or anything, but there are people who stand to make money by selling alternatives. And there are people who stand to make money by making somebody else look like the bad guy. I think if you're ignoring, if you're talking about global warming, if that's the big focus is climate change, there's a lot of other people you could look to. There's a lot of other issues you could look to before you'd pick on a rancher. But because they are so decentralized, because they're small, because they're busy working on their ranch, they don't have time to go and advocate for themselves. And so I think they're an easy scapegoat in some ways. So all that to say, the reality is ranchers are busy. They're often very modest people. They're not trying to become famous on Instagram. And I like them for that. But there's also a real vested interest in making them look bad right now and in coloring what they do in a negative light. So it's important to have a voice, even though it may be out of the comfort zone of most in agriculture. It's very important to have a voice right now to protect this way of life. And we need it for other reasons. Our country needs heroes. Growing up in a small town, I'm sure you can relate, Lauren. I always had heroes to look up to. The older people that I knew were always my heroes since I was a kid. My parents were my heroes. I had such a beautiful view of the US and the people that live here because of how I grew up. I knew that, in my purview, people were hardworking and honest and had a lot of integrity. And when I went to school in Los Angeles, I was so shocked that my peer group had no connection with the land, had no connection with the people growing their food, and had a very negative view of the average middle-class American because they were indoctrinated to think that our country is full of problems and greed and all of this. I just couldn't relate less because to me, the average American was a hardworking man or woman raising their family and doing their best. And to me, those people are heroes. I still think that we all have this inner love of the cowboy lifestyle. I've seen that in people in urban settings. They light up. There's nothing they love more than the cowboy iconography. They get very inspired by it. It's kind of our American heritage. So in one sense, it may be a job and it may be a very small group of people that can still claim any, ownership of that title. But in a larger sense, it is our heritage here in the American West. It is sort of the picture of the American spirit. And I think more than ever, we need those heroes right now. So there's just a lot of reasons to get out of that comfort zone and share your story, because I think the country needs it and the industry needs it if it's going to continue to survive.
Yeah. And you bring up so many great points just about even like where we are as a country right now. There's so many, oh gosh, I could I could go off on it, but it seems like at every corner everybody's fighting with each other, and there's so many different ideas flowing around, and everybody's getting offended by something or other, and the morale is seemingly really agitated, I guess, is a good word. But going back to like the ranchers, and having to at this point like almost defend what they're doing when they're the people that are growing our food. Like, and I didn't grow up in agriculture, but when you talk about, your heroes and everything growing up, yeah, of course. I had heroes too, and I always have had an affinity for animals, and I wanted to be a veterinarian when I grew up, and I always had this, like my parents always instilled in us, hard work and everything. And I think that's one of the things that now, since being in agriculture and for the last several years, and really, now to a point where I am going to be growing my own cattle herd, and have been working on different ranches and whatnot. It's the values that are instilled in the access and the direct connection that you get with the land and the animals is something that cannot be duplicated anywhere else. And it's pretty incredible, like you were saying before, that some people think, and I can't remember if you had posted this or something, but somebody had put a comment out regarding, where we get our food from or something. And it was like, well, our meat comes from the grocery store. Like, that's where it was like made. And it's wild to kind of see, and whatever, wherever that comment came from, who knows what that person was trying to get across, whether that was like actually true or not. But it's just this connection that we have come so far from, like, our ancestors, they hunted, they gathered, they lived off the land. And we as a culture have gotten so far from it because we've moved into, convenience and technology. While obviously technology is great, it's brought so many amazing things, but I think we've just come so far from nature and what it actually means to do work with our hands, and to have the appreciation to grow our own food. Or, for me, what I'm learning is like just being able to see a cow be birthed, to calve, and then seeing that life cycle of that cow is just incredible. And it gives such a responsibility, and for me personally, just like a sense of purpose. And not only do I love it, is it hard work? Yeah, of course. But it's a sense of purpose, and just like something that feels innate to me, where I think when you don't get that connection when you live in a city. You don't get that connection when you just go to the grocery store. And now, I go to the grocery store, and sometimes it's really hard for me to buy meat. And I released a podcast episode about all of this, but it's, I don't buy meat from the grocery store as much. And not to say that grocery store meat is all that bad, but obviously my push is to really support local farmers and ranchers. So, I just think that when we can continue to bring awareness to what farmers and ranchers are actually doing on the land and how much they really do care, because they've gotten such a bad rap. I mean, I have the people that I've met, they care more about the land and the animals. And obviously there's always bad eggs everywhere, right? But they care more about the land and the animals than anybody, because that's their livelihood, right? So I'd love to kind of hear your opinions on, or even just, if you feel comfortable sharing, like, when you talk to these ranchers and farmers, or when you go to these, and even in, with your platform, what are some of the things that you're hearing from people that are the most challenging for them, whether they're a producer or whether they're involved in agriculture some way? What are your thoughts and experiences that you've had so far?
Well, I love everything you said. I resonate with that completely. And I think, yeah, I love what you're doing. I love that you're adding your voice to this. And it's really exciting that you're a first generation in agriculture. We need a lot more of that. Sometimes it can be a bit of an insular community. And I think it's really important to counteract that, because we need more people in agriculture. Our country needs more people in agriculture. So,
Yeah.
along those lines, I would say, speaking with folks, especially here in California, I think we really see this in a very heightened way because most people don't realize that California is a very, very agricultural state. We produce, I think the Central Valley produces something like a quarter of all the food produced in the nation. So it's just a very agriculturally rich state. There's a lot of ranching here. It's a very diverse state. Where I grew up in Northern California, it's 2.5, 3 hours north of San Francisco. It's like another world up there. People don't know anything about it. I'm now living in Southern California. I meet people who don't have they've never been north of San Francisco. So they're just very disconnected from the average person, like you're saying, putting the food on their plate, putting the food in the grocery store. They have no concept of what that person's life is like. And so it's kind of a microcosm here in California of what's going on a larger scale throughout the US, where you have these big cities like San Francisco and LA, and their votes completely override and shut out the voices of the people who provide all of the basic necessities those cities rely on. And so the people in small towns, the people who are producing their food, the people who are transporting their food, truck drivers, the blue collar people in the state of California really don't have a voice. So I would say when I speak to folks here in California, I think they're feeling what may be coming for the rest of the US. I hope not, but I think they're feeling that overregulation, that really government crackdown on their way of life. Again, they're an easy scapegoat. So it's easy to blame agriculture, blame the truckers. We just had a law passed in California regulating new trucks. They need to be like, I'm not going to know the specifics off the top, but I think they're basically shutting down normal trucks and requiring EVs here in the near term future, which is just an asinine.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't even contain myself right now, but yes.
Right. I mean, I live in Orange County and we have a little airport full of private jets. And if they skipped a couple of those private jet trips, that would pretty much wipe out, or that would make up for any gains they would have from requiring the truckers who transport everything we need to survive.
Yeah.
So anyways, I'm rambling. I could go on about this. There's so much over-regulation I feel for the people who have to deal with it. We have water issues. We have all kinds of issues here. And I think that sort of oppressive top-down regulation on normal Americans just trying to live their lives is a big issue for people in agriculture that I hear a lot. They just feel unheard. They feel like the state doesn't pay attention to them. They feel like the average voter is not aware of the issues that impact them and how it will impact the consumer down the road. They see the prices going up at the grocery store, but they don't always realize that those regulations and politicians that they vote for are pretty directly connected. So I would say that's a big issue. I mean, I'm very optimistic. I'm more of an optimistic person, maybe delusionally so. I see positive things. I do see more people speaking up about these things. I see a return to a more holistic way of eating that involves animal products. And I think there's a big movement I'm seeing here in California, toward kind of against veganism and against fake food and against mystery ingredients and back to a more holistic, sustainable way of eating that's actually connected with nature. So those are positive signs to me, but we have a long way to go. And I don't think the government is on track with that. So I would say overregulation is probably one of the biggest issues I hear about. And that's just going to amplify. This is a global issue. The push for changing the food system is coming from big, powerful sources from,
Yeah.
We all know the names, but there's just a big push for really kind of attacking the little guy, attacking the traditional ways of eating and living that have served us for many generations, thinking that will change the weather. I'm not bought into that concept, and I think that ranchers and farmers are sort of at the tip of the spear for this issue. So I hear about that a lot. I hear about how the regulations, it's kind of like death by 1,000 cuts. They're just it's not like you're going to see an article, you know, one of the positive things is Americans have a very high view of farmers and ranchers. When you do public polling, journalism is very low. The government is very low. Ranchers and farmers have high trust ratings with the American people. So you're not going to see the media come out and directly attack ranchers and farmers most of the time. They'll do it indirectly. So if you look for articles about banning meat or Americans eating too much meat, you'll see a lot of that. I just saw an article last week in the UK Guardian saying that farmer or ranchers should be paid to just grow trees on their land instead of raise cattle. We need to use public tax dollars to pay ranchers just to grow trees. So you'll see kind of indirect attacks like that. You'll never see an article, very rarely see an article come out swinging just for the farmer rancher because they are beloved by Americans. But these little regulations have a big impact. And I think we're going to see more of that. And I think that's probably the number one issue I hear about from ranchers these days. If that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah. And I think too, like, not to go down the conspiracy theorist rabbit hole or anything, but, but it is like there are these little tiny movements that are made, right? Or these little tiny changes that over time will affect us, but people aren't really thinking about that right now. We can still go to the grocery store and pick up the meat. We can still go and get what we need. And, you're not really thinking about what is coming down the line, in 10 years, but the changes that could have potentially been made 10 years ago, we're starting to see the effects now. And like you said, big corporations, you don't need to be buying food from, Beyond Meat or whatever, because you can do it yourself. And then you are not a consumer for that giant corporation. And they don't want to give up that control. But when you do control the food system, it's easier to control people. Right. So, yeah, I don't really know where I was going with that comment, but you just bring up a lot of good points there.
Well, I think you're 100% right. And if I was to get conspiratorial, it's not even conspiratorial, right? Because if you study the Soviet Union, you study big totalitarian governments, even in the last 100 years, they always come for the farmers first because it's a form of independence and self-reliance that we need. And I think that there is a bigger picture here. My pinned post on Unwon that I love is quote by Edward Abbey. He said, "If America could be once again a nation of self-reliant farmers, craftsmen, hunters, ranchers, and artists, then the rich would have little power to dominate others, neither to serve nor to rule. That was the American dream." I just love that. If I were to have any political statement in my life, it would be that. I think that we should honor the individual. That American spirit of self-reliance is a really beautiful thing, and I would never want to see that crushed. And I think these regulations crush that by 1,000 cuts, and things like you brought up the EID tags. I mean, you just move in a direction where you eventually have so much government red tape and control that we've really lost something in that process. So the EID issue, I actually just had my dad do a video about this because I was home scouting for the doc, and a box of EID text came in the mail for one of his clients that requested it. And I was like, you got to explain this for people. People probably haven't even seen these, but they've been in the media quite a bit. So the recent omnibus bill that passed the House and Senate included $15 million in funding for EID tags if those are mandated. So it's provisional funding that will only kick in if the EID tags are mandated. Some cattle groups are for it, some are against it. The basic idea is that they allow tracking from a further distance. There are ear tags that allow electronic reading rather than just visual looking at the numbers like it's been done for a long time. And I think, in theory, maybe that's a nice, convenient idea, and people may have different opinions about how that would impact their operation. But in the aggregate, it goes back to that concern that is very valid at this point. Just how much government control should we voluntarily accept? I think that's always a very valid concern, especially since, we shouldn't trust the government to have our best interests at heart. We should always remain skeptical. That's sort of the nature of our American system is checks and balances, power to the people, and remaining very skeptical of any new regulations introduced. So That's the argument against it. And it does just start to feel like death by a thousand cuts. And why is there so much interest in increasing control and surveillance on independent family farmers and ranchers? Why is that a priority for the government? I think it does go back to what you're saying, Lauren, which is there is a, not to get too conspiratorial, but if you wanted to really control people, you would need to look at those food systems. And when you have big corporate food companies that control most of the brands in the grocery store, those are easy to control. But the farmers and the ranchers and the producers who are out there on the ground, they're not as easy to control. They're very decentralized, and they truly are some of the last really independent people among us. And just to, a final note on that, one of the things that makes me optimistic and makes me encouraged is how much the average American loves to learn about this topic. There's really an appreciation and affinity when I talk to people from all across the political spectrum. I always find common ground talking about these topics, because when they learn the truth about what ranching looks like, they're very encouraged and happy. It's like a positive thing to know that you shouldn't feel guilty about eating beef. You can feel great about eating beef raised in the US. That cow probably had a great life cared for by somebody who truly cared about them, because, like you're saying, ranchers and farmers, and specifically in this case, ranchers, love their animals and their land more than anybody. They're close to that cycle of life and death. They're close to nature. They take on a lot of that burden for the common consumer. They don't meat wrapped in cellophane. I didn't know that cow. I didn't know that steer. I didn't know their life cycle. I wasn't there when they were born. I wasn't there when I sent them off to slaughter. Like I'm outsourcing a lot of that pain, a lot of that joy as well, to someone who I don't know. And I think that we owe it to ranchers to understand what they do. We owe it to farmers to understand what they're doing in raising our food. That's kind of the least we can do, because we're not just buying meat, we're outsourcing a lot of the responsibility of what it's always meant to be a human, which involves seeing a lot of life and death in nature up close. And I just think most people are very receptive to that. Even people who may be very divergent politically, they are really, really open to this story and this message, and they're very receptive to it. And I've seen it change hearts and minds. I mean, we did our first long form doc last year called "You Just Can't See Them from the Road." It's a piece about ranchers here on the West Coast, in California specifically. And it's actually gotten into a lot of festivals that I didn't think it would get into, that it'll be like the only ranching friendly or working class friendly doc on a lot of these festival lineups. And people have come up to me after the festivals just in tears, very touched by the people that we portray in the story. It really does something when you can sort of bridge that rural urban divide. I just have seen people moved. I've seen hearts change. And I think that would go a long way in our country toward healing some of our divide, if we would talk to each other across that rural urban boundary and see what each other's up to, and not let the media tell us about each other.
Yeah. Bringing back to the positives, it's so cool to hear you say that, because especially on social media, we can tend to see a lot of like the negatives, right? Or even just in mainstream media or whatever. We can tend to focus on the negatives, but seeing those positives come out of it, and like you're saying, meeting people who have just seen something and have been moved to tears about things. I mean, that is really an amazing thing. And I think the more that we can get to those people, and like you were saying, I think at the end of the day, we all want essentially the same things, right? It's just a matter of where we're getting our information from, what side we're coming from. But at the end of the day, I think we all really want the same thing. So being able to do what you do and talk to, that's okay.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, I do think we really have a lot in common, and I see a lot of the negatives on social media. You get a lot of negative comments, you get a lot of silly attacks, and sometimes I handle it with more grace than other times. But there's, for the most part, people are very receptive, and just it's easy to get hung up on the negative comments, but for the most part, most of the people who follow Unwon aren't in a ranching or farming background, but they really want to understand it. And I love that. I think that's such a positive sign. That's such a hopeful thing that we can really start to talk to each other without the mainstream media dictating what we're allowed to hear and who we're allowed to speak to. We can start talking to each other and healing some of that divide. I think more education on these topics is essential. That's kind of how democracy is supposed to work, republic is supposed to work. We need to be hearing from each other, because in this country, the people really do have the power. So to take an example, something like the EID tags, a person in a city may have no idea why that would be problematic for a rancher. So communicating these issues, if they were to hear a rancher's perspective, it could totally change their mind. So anyway, all that to say, I love what you're doing as well. I think it's so important, and we really do just need more reaching across these aisles, these divides, to share each other's perspectives. We're really not all that different. And that's what really makes me optimistic and hopeful in spite of a few negative voices out there. I just see a lot of room for optimism and encouragement. In the democratization that social media gives us, we can really start talking to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great to hear. So going to about America Unwon. So did you, when you first started it, did you kind of have an idea that you wanted to make it the platform that it is now? And could you tell us a little bit about how that has grown over the years?
Sure. So, I started it really, it was kind of the child of that initial blog I did back in DC. I kept running the blog for a while. I would just aggregate I have a bunch of Google alerts. I read everything I can about what's going on in ag and related issues, not just agriculture, but really issues that impact working class Americans, people in sort of the muscle industries that basically give us everything we need to survive in an increasingly white collar society. So I wanted to provide coverage for those types of stories, and I kept doing that for a while after DC, and then picking it up again. It's not something that I ever made a dime off of, but I think it's just something that I love to do in my free time. I just wanted to create a platform that reflected sort of what I'm talking about, these stories that impact working class Americans, but also kind of portray the beauty of this lifestyle. To me, I feel like as a filmmaker, I see things in a certain way. Everybody, as a creative person, I have my personal vision and view of this country and things that inspire me. And I didn't always see that reflected because the things that inspire me aren't necessarily the things that inspire other filmmakers. I think working class America is beautiful. I think our small towns are beautiful. I love that kind of rowdy American spirit. I love the history of our country and the immigrants that came here and made it what it is. My dad is Portuguese. He's a Azorean, and growing up in that small subculture in Central California, he has his own perspective of what it means to be an American. And just those types of stories to me are really beautiful. It's what makes us special. We're like a nation of the world's, we're not royal. Most people that emigrated to the US don't have noble blood. We came here because we wanted opportunity. We are driven. We have a vision. And that's really what constitutes our culture. We're a rowdy bunch. We're big dreamers. The people that ended up coming west, we all have to be the descendants of some brave person that decided to come out into the wilderness and create a life for themselves in the American West. So that's sort of what I wanted to portray. I wanted to tell stories, but I also wanted to inspire people. I wanted to highlight that type of spirit that inspires me. And so America Unwon was an outlet for that and just a fun project. It's grown a lot. And I hope it continues to grow because to me, these just are stories that aren't being told and they need to be told. And I hope I can kind of continue it's still taking shape because I didn't think it would grow like this. It was sort of just a creative outlet and a way to keep reporting stories that matter for anybody who was similarly interested. But because it has grown quite a bit, I'm still, I want to see what types of content people want and try to continue to grow it in as many ways as I can. I think the documentaries sort of play a role in that. There's so many stories that I would love to highlight, and I think fascinating and interesting and completely untold by mainstream media. The story I mentioned earlier that we're covering next week up in the Mendocino National Forest is one of them. But just sort of creating not just, how do I describe this? I want to make it kind of inspirational for people. So I wouldn't say it's just a pure journalism platform, because there's definitely an element of a vision and storytelling to it that I want to keep as well. So it's a little unique, I would say, but I'm excited to see how it continues to grow. And I'm really honored that people resonate with it. And again, to me, that just goes back to the people I'm covering. I think they're wonderful people who deserve all the attention, all the love. And I think it has a lot less to do with me and a lot more to do with them, that those posts and the content is resonating with people.
Yeah, yeah, and I've definitely noticed that on too. I think you've shared a few clips of the documentaries that you've done and some of the film work that you've done, and it is really beautiful. So I definitely see that coming through, and like I said before, I'm definitely excited to see you share a lot more of that. So you talked a little bit about your dad. So I know recently he's been like the star of your Instagram in the last week, but I've learned quite a bit from your stories from him. So could you talk a little bit about just that, and then the platform that you guys are building, Ranch Vision?
Totally. Okay. So yeah, my dad is amazing. I think he's probably the reason that I'm interested in all of this in the first place. I think just growing up in his ranch truck and his perspective, his way of life has shaped me more than anything. So he is a very special person. He's a large animal vet. My mom is a vet too, but she raised 8 kids, which is certainly a very worthy thing to do with your life, and also very time consuming. So
Yeah. Wow.
in the vet space. But they have their practice together up north in Mendocino County. And he's just got stories on stories. I mean, if any young people are listening to this and they would like a lifestyle that allows them to make a good living and help people, but also have a very adventurous day-to-day job, I would definitely consider being a large animal vet. You will, no 2 days are the same. He could truly write a book. He's actually had some producers reach out to him about doing a TV show, which he said sounded like a pain and he didn't want to do it. So I am sticking a camera in his face, and I'm his kid, so he can't say no. So I was my poor dad. So I was home for this doc, just scouting it. And one day I was just me and my dad at home, and I was like, you know what? I think you should make some videos. He had those EID tags. I wanted him to make a video about that. I wanted to ask him a few questions. I put on my story, does anyone have questions for a ranch vet? A bunch of people were shooting out all of these varied questions. So spent the morning with me filming him and making him be the most reluctant social media star in the world. And yeah, he's just, I think his wisdom comes through. I think, it kind of goes back to who are the people that don't want the spotlight these days, who don't want to be an influencer, don't want to be a social media star. Those are probably the people we should be hearing more from. And I might be biased, but he's just a very intelligent person. He's got a great balanced perspective, and just 36 years as a large animal vet, you learn a few things about managing ranches, and he's also a ranch management consultant. So that also led to the program he developed back in the 90s called Ranch Vision, which is a software that helps project ranch profits. I've never seen anything like it. It's very cool. So that serial entrepreneur side of me is getting a little workout, trying to launch a software product for ranchers. That's been a fun challenge for my sister and I. But we revamped it as a web app for the 21st century, since it formerly lived on floppy disks. We're rolling it out now. We have a test group of ranchers who are using the program and giving us their feedback, and that's just been so exciting. And I think we'll roll it out on a large scale here in the next month. So I'll keep making him post, because that's helpful for getting the word out about his program he invented. But yeah, it's just a really, really cool program that helps ranchers see the future and manage their profits. And that's really always been my dad's passion. He loves animals, but he always told me that the thing he really loved about his job was the people he works with. And he wanted to provide something that would help ranchers really see where they're headed and make decisions that will allow them to make the most profit with their ranching operations. So that's sort of the high level view of what Ranch Vision does, but we're really excited about it. And I hope that it helps ranchers just have more control. And we used it last week on a ranch operation. One of our test cohort members, and he's just a very experienced rancher. I have so much respect for him. He really knows what he's doing. But using Ranch Vision, he found a way to increase his profits by 60+%. So
Wow.
just, yeah, really cool opportunity for folks. It's just, there's never really been a way to forecast your ranch profits before, because it's such a complex business. It's not like any other type of business where you just have, an inventory and you sell it and, you calculate your profits and losses very easily. With ranching, you are dealing with a basic unit of value, which is your grazing, your grassland, and you're managing living herds, populations that live and die and breed and get sick and they need to be vaccinated. There's all these decisions. So your product at the end of the day, it's very difficult to forecast what you're going to make. So his software that he came up with uses very complex math equations to project that out and give you your futures based on your inputs that you know now. So it's a special program. I'm really honored to help him bring it to life. And hopefully that'll be here in the next month or two once I wrap my doc. I can think about it a little more, but we have a great team and yeah.
That's awesome. That sounds really cool. So do you just input all of your own data? So can it work for like a cattle rancher and then also, like a wheat farmer? Does it?
So it's just for livestock operations. So
Okay.
beef, sheep, goats. So if you have a goat or a sheep operation and you have a wool or mohair aspect to that, you can also calculate those futures. But yeah, it's just for grazing because it's so unique. But yeah, and you know what? I don't really think I've talked about this too much. So I feel like your podcast is the first time I've really talked about Ranch Vision. But I think it's a great opportunity for ranchers to have a little more control over their futures. And again, there's other ag softwares out there for people in crop production. But I think that the livestock industry has been really underserved. And this software is a solution that is really practical for them in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I know we've used a couple of different apps, but the what you're talking about sounds like it includes everything because the couple that we've used is just managing the cattle and the herd, keeping all the data on them. But and then there was another one, pasture map, I think it was, that we used, and that was just that was a little bit more in depth, but the Ranch Vision sounds like it kind of encompasses a lot more, which is really cool.
And those are great record keeping apps. I'm sure yeah, but the Ranch Vision is a little unique because it's not just bookkeeping, which I think sometimes these ag tech companies over focus on the amount of records ranchers really want to keep about each individual cow.
Yeah.
And they don't provide any actionable data for that. So Ranch Vision, you can input your basic information that all ranchers know or can easily access. And then you get actionable charts and graphs that you can play with to see, well, if I do this vaccine or if I calve it, 1 instead of 2, or if I, how is my stocker enterprise stacking up against my cow-calf enterprise? Those types of questions, they can see how their profit would change if they made different management decisions, which so far software's out there for record keeping just allow you to keep records on your phone, but they don't, that actionable side. So that's something that I think my dad came up with because he's been working with ranchers for so long. He really could kind of see more than a lot of these ag tech entrepreneurs. What do people actually need out in the field? What's actually helpful to them and beneficial to their operations? I'm sure those other softwares have great use cases too, but that was just a big hole that he saw for his clients and wanted to share on a broader scale.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. And I'll definitely put the information about it in the show notes too. So just a couple more questions for you, Keely. What do you think, especially, even our younger generation, what do you think are some short-term solutions that can help support, farmers and ranchers, and just being able to get more people involved in agriculture?
That's a great question. I think that there's so much opportunity there. I should look up the number, but there was a new census of agriculture that just came out. I wrote about it on my website, but I think the average age of farmers in the US right now is, I want to say 55, 60. So we
Yeah.
definitely have a problem where we're not getting enough young people involved in agriculture. And I think farmers and ranchers should lead that conversation. As a journalist, I want to, I feel that my role is more sharing what impacts producers directly. But from what I have heard, it does seem like there's a big problem with young people not wanting to go back into farming and ranching, partly because of that overregulation, how difficult it is to stay in the industry. So I think on a governmental level, um, voters need to be educated about what's impacting agriculture and producers. They need to understand how these issues are impacting them. Whatever side of the aisle you're on, you should put pressure on your representatives to support American agriculture. I think that's very important. And that's going to go a long way toward making it more viable for young people to stay in this industry. But on a broader scale, I think, ag has some work to do in being inclusive and making sure that younger generations have opportunities. I get a lot of questions thrown on people who aren't in agriculture, and they reach out asking me all the time, how can I get involved? Is there some type of apprenticeship program? And I don't always have a great answer for them. I think it's tough, and maybe you can speak more to that, Lauren, since you're saying you're first gen. I think it's tough to break into this industry. I think it's we could do more to help encourage young people to get into ranching, get into farming, even if that's not their background. It can be a bit of an insular, self-protective community. And while I think there's reason for that, I think it's also just important to understand that if we want it to survive and thrive, we need people outside of ag invested as well, because ranchers are a very, very small percentage of the US. Less than 2% of Americans work in production agriculture. So it's good when shows like Yellowstone create interest in what we're doing, what you guys are doing, because we need more people invested. So we want to encourage anything that shines a good light on American ag, and we want to make sure that I think, if I were to give advice to the ranching and farming community, just being open to young people who may look really different, may, have zero experience, but have interest in the industry. We want to foster that and encourage that. I think that's really important moving forward. And I think we can use social media toward that end too. I love seeing more farmers and ranchers sharing what they're doing. I think that just gives a great little window into what this lifestyle is like for people who don't have that background. So I think that's a really positive development. I think more open arms toward young generations interested in the world of agriculture is really important for the future of the industry as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just had this conversation with somebody the other day, and, somebody had asked me too, like, how did you get involved in it? And I said, well, I just did, and fortunately I've met some amazing people who have welcomed me with open arms. I've also met a couple people that were not all that welcoming because I didn't grow up in ag, right? But you know, that's okay. It didn't stop me because I knew I wanted to do this. And I think that when somebody who isn't involved in agriculture right now and wants to get into it, I think when you do meet that person or whoever, the rancher or farmer, or you enter into a program of some sort, once you there and you show them that you want to be there and that you're willing to put in the work, I think that is what speaks the most, and yeah, like you said, the show Yellowstone is shows sometimes a different light on what ranching actually is, but like, and there's also so much, it seems like, with the whole Beyonce thing now, and
Yeah.
there seems to be a lot of eyes on the Western industry right now, and I've obviously, and I'm sure as you have seen as well, like, the good and the bad, and at the end of the day, it's shedding light on the Western industry, and that can be a good thing. And I think just going back to what I was saying, I think that if you just show that you really want to be there and that you're willing to put in the hard work that is needed. And it's not just about riding around on a horse all day long. Ranchers and farmers are some of the nicest people that I have ever met. And you know this growing up around it. But I do think that it is a very welcoming industry once you do kind of get past some of the barriers, because I do agree with you too that there sometimes it is a little bit of a close-knit community where it feels hard to break into at times.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you're right. We are really having a moment. I mean, it's like the year of the cowgirl out here. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Everybody, and I think that does speak to, that desire that we have to be in touch with our roots and to get back to some of the basics. I think we're all so removed from that in the US, and it's just becoming a very urbanized society. We're all online. I think people are craving something real, and this lifestyle really, really resonates. And I think that speaks to something that is very positive and encouraging, that people are really looking for that connection. And I think that'll naturally bring more young people into this world, which is exciting for the future of the
Yeah.
industry. And definitely something we want to encourage. And it's just, it is cool to see that. I think it's positive as far we're talking about our country being in sort of dire straits, but it's nice that we know we have a problem. We must know we have a problem, because all of a sudden everybody wants to be a cowboy. And what does that say?
Right.
No, I think people realize we've forgotten something important here. And as a Christian, I really think that the closer you are to nature, it's just people do tend to be kinder and have a lot of integrity. Not always, of course, but when you work close to nature, it's very humbling, because you really can't hide from the realities of the elements, and you're much more exposed to how vulnerable we are, and also just how good God is in our beautiful creation that we get to live in. So there's maybe more pain, there may be more danger, but there's also a lot of joy. And I think people in agriculture sense they get to experience more of the full spectrum of life than folks outside of it sometimes. I think it's a blessed place to be, because when you're close to nature like that, you get to see a little bit more of God.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you there. I think the times that I felt closest to God are absolutely that, is being around the cows or being on the land or just doing work with my hands. And
Right.
he calls us to be stewards of the land, right? And stewards of the animals. And I feel like my faith has grown in part because of this work. So I 100% agree with you there. And I think that we can there's so many things that we can learn.
Right. I love that. I love that. I mean, it's true that we've sort of forgotten that, but that's a basic part of being a human being, is we're supposed to steward nature. We're supposed to care about the lives and well-being of animals. That's what God made us to do. This
Yeah.
is work that we're supposed to take care of. I think that's so essential, and something that we've kind of lost. Some people, um, again, it's not always political, but I do think there's been a little bit of that sense of taking care of nature that we forfeited to maybe the environmentalists who don't have a lot in common with ranching. Maybe there is something good in their desire to take care of the planet, something that we don't need to totally reject, but can just help shape as people
Mhm.
closer to nature in agriculture, instead of rejecting the spirit that environmentalists have of desiring to take care of nature. We can find common ground with them and then help educate them about what truly taking care of nature looks like. I think there's a lot of common ground there that we shouldn't just reject outright, because we may be coming at it from different political angles or different backgrounds. There's a core of commonality there, and just wanting to steward creation, like you're saying, which is truly something that God has put on our hearts and that we are called to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Thank you for sharing all of that. Well, okay, just to wrap up a little bit, I always ask this question, and I know it's asked a lot around, but I always love to hear people's answers. What is the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
So I don't, this is sort of the spirit that my dad raised me with, and I think it's served me really well, and I don't hear it talked about enough. I just think being fearless, especially as a woman, I think the Bible describes a godly woman as someone who is fearless over and over again. She laughs without fear of the future. She doesn't fear anything that is frightening. I think that facing life with fearlessness is where you stand in your power. I think that if you're a believer in God, if you're a believer in Jesus, you don't have anything to fear. So I think if I were to give advice to young people, I have no reason to be working in film. I grew up in a very, very, very small town. My high school graduating class had 30 kids. The opportunities I've been given don't make sense to me. I didn't have connections. I think God has just blown me away over and over with the opportunities he's put in front of me. And they really come from being maybe a little delusional on my part. So maybe my advice is to be delusional, but also just to be fearless, because if you have a dream, if you have something that you want to do, it sounds cheesy and trite, but it really has served me well. You shouldn't let anything stop you. You shouldn't limit yourself. There's just so much opportunity out there. The world really belongs to the people who are bold and who are willing to try for it. There's an incredible amount of opportunity, especially with the democratization, like we were talking about, of social media and communications. You can create your own voice. You can find your own opportunities as a small town kid. The internet does help you open up some of those opportunities. I bring that up because of Unwon, starting that. It's been great for my career. And I think that when you use these tools that may seem scary and modern to your benefit, there's a lot there for people in ag and people who live in, grow up in very rural areas. You can truly open doors for yourself that weren't possible before. So I would just really encourage that fearless spirit, and, don't let anybody talk down to you because you're from a small town. I remember being in my editor's office in DC, the only girl, the only person under 30 in that office, scared out of my mind, and just telling myself, well, I bet none of these guys could ride a green horse, so I can get out there and get this done. And that would be encouragement to myself.
Awesome.
So I think, don't let anyone look down on you for being rural. There's so much opportunity out there. I think the world needs more of what those small town kids can bring. We need to hear from them. We need to hear those stories. We need to hear you. And I would say, just be fearless. There's a need for you, and there's a whole lot of opportunity out there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I got goosebumps when you first started talking about it, because that's just incredible. And I definitely think you're an example of that. And just as you're talking, just the reminder of the opportunities that we have, and what a country that America is, and how it was built, and what it stands for. How blessed we are to live here, and the opportunities that it gives us. And not to go off on a side note, but just the hate that America has received from the mainstream media. We have so many problems here, and we have to change all these things, and America's terrible, and all this kind of stuff, where we are so blessed to live here, and America is one of the greatest countries, and just to be able to have the opportunities that we have, I don't think that we can take for granted a lot of the times, right? So thank you for sharing all of that.
Well, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm trying not to get too long-winded here, but that's what I'm trying to say sort of clumsily, is like, I started America Unwon and named it that partly because I hated that vision that most media outlets portray of the U.S. I wanted young people to see there's so much opportunity out there. The West isn't one. You can truly do anything that you want to do. And I think showcasing these lifestyles of people who have carved their own paths, especially, anyone in a rural setting who's really created their own dream, living in a very self-reliant way. I think that's inspiring for young people who may think the only future available to them is sitting behind a computer screen. They may not realize that there's still so much opportunity out there. And you're seizing that, Lauren, clearly as a first generation woman in agriculture. And, in your podcast, you're doing incredible things. And I think more people should be encouraged to, whatever your dream looks like, go for it, because there truly is so much opportunity. I feel like the message of the media, which is that, especially if you come from certain backgrounds, or if you check certain boxes, you're going to really struggle in this country. I hate that message. I feel like I'm a poster child of someone who shouldn't be doing all the cool things God has allowed me to do. And the fact that I'm doing them just speaks to the opportunity left in this country. So I'm like the big sister of 8. So I'm always giving hype speeches that annoy my little siblings. feel like that would be my core message is just like you really can do whatever you want in this country. There's so much opportunity. Don't let people discourage you or tell you that it's over. There's just a lot out there for you. So anyway, I'll stop myself from giving my big sister hype speech now.
No, thank you. I mean, I think we'll end it there because I don't have anything to add. That was some great advice. And I know that people will find this episode really inspiring. So thank you for sharing all of that. And just thank you again for all that you're doing and all of the work and the time and the energy that you're putting into all of the work that you do. And we'll definitely keep in touch. And I just can't wait to see what's down the road for you. So thank you so much, Keely.
Thank you, Lauren. Same to you. I'm going to be an avid listener and follower. I'm excited about what you're doing. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you. All right. We'll talk soon.
Yes. Talk soon.